Thanks, Bob, for your kind words of introduction, and thank you for inviting me to address this meeting of Yes, Maryhill. I don't have any great local connection with Maryhill, apart from the canal, of course, because I can remember when I represented Falkirk for many, many years, I campaigned for the regeneration of central Scotland's canals, and it's thanks to that campaign that the folk from Maryhill can now take a wee boat all the way to Falkirk. A wee change for going down the water. And in the unlikely event that you want to sail on to Edinburgh, you can go up the Falkirk Wheel into the Union Canal and on your way. So anyway, it's quite a journey. I would like to speak this evening about part of my political journey, because I haven't always believed in the cause of independence, and I think that you may find that my story is of some interest. Like other speakers, Kat and Carolyn and John Paul, I come from a Labour background. My granddad, in fact, was one of the founders of the first branch of the Labour Party in the county of Fife, way back at the turn of the 19th, 20th centuries. My grandfather wasn't born in Scotland, he was actually born in Ireland and came to Scotland in about 1880. He was only 4 years old then. He was the youngest of a family of 11, and they settled in Cowdenbeath in Fife because there were new coal mines opening up at that particular time. My granddad went to school in Fife. He left school at the age of 10. He went to work down a coal mine at the age of 12, and he spent virtually his whole life working in the labour and trade union movement to improve things for his fellow workers and for his fellow citizens. And what drove a lot of these pioneers in the labour movement at that time was a hunger. Sometimes it was real hunger, hunger in the belly, but always it was a hunger for social justice. And that hunger for social justice and that campaign for social justice is something which is just as relevant now in the 21st century as it was over 100 years ago when the Labour Party was formed. Now, here we are in a situation, and I sometimes think what I used to believe in when I see the situation around us today. I used to think that the election of a Labour government committed to high standards of social justice for the people of Scotland and indeed for the people of the whole of the United Kingdom was the best answer to the problems which beset us. I had faith in the Labour Party at that time, and I felt that there was some commitment to socialist values. In fact, I recently came across an old election leaflet from my campaign way back in 1979, and it put a question to the electorate. It said, "We stand at a crossroads. You are faced with a choice, and the result of this election could shape the kind of society which we have for many, many years to come. Do you want a caring, sharing society where the strong look after the weak and where most help goes to those who are most in need? Or do you want a greedy, selfish, ruthless rat race where only the strongest survive and the weakest go to the wall?" Well, in that election way back in 1979, the people of Scotland, by and large, chose the caring, sharing society. But the people of the United Kingdom as a whole, they by and large opted for the rat race. And what did we get? We got a Prime Minister who said there is no such thing as society. And we had 18 years of Tory havoc with all the de-industrialisation and all the social and economic dislocation that led to. Well, here we are again. Scotland is again being ruled by a UK government that we did not elect. We have a coalition down at Westminster which is hell-bent on a course of rewarding the rich with massive tax handouts and punishing the poor with massive cuts in their welfare benefits, including this iniquitous bedroom tax, which surely must be one of the most evil forms of taxation that's ever been invented. And people understandably are crying out for change. And yet, when I look at Westminster, what prospect of change is there? Real radical change. I mean, I sometimes turn on the box just to look at my old workplace, and I look at not just the government benches but the opposition benches which I occupied for most of the time that I was there. And what do I see? A leader of the opposition, Ned Milliband, who gives no commitment whatsoever to overturn or repeal the cuts which are being imposed by the Tory-led coalition. He doesn't even give a commitment to repeal the bedroom tax if and when he ever gets the keys to number 10 Downing Street. And so I say this, that changing the tenancy of 10 Downing Street is not going to bring about the radical fundamental changes which I want to see and which I believe that the majority of the people of Scotland want to see. I have no faith in the status quo, and although independence may not be a panacea for all of Scotland's ills, I do think it presents a massive opportunity for change, and it will be change for the better. Now, I'm a convert to this cause of independence, and my conversion it's not based on any great feeling or of emotion. It's based mainly on my experience, particularly my parliamentary experience. I spent 26 years, well, some people may say I misspent 26 years at Westminster, followed by 8 years in the Scottish Parliament, and I've been retired for 6 years now, and I haven't just been lounging around in my retirement. The retirement has given me time to think, time to reflect on some of the events, big and small, which have affected the people of Scotland and further afield over the past half century or more. And I have come to the conclusion that Westminster is completely out of touch with the people of Scotland. The Scottish Parliament, on the other hand, okay, it's not perfect, but it has been in existence now for some 14 years, and I think we can judge it on its track record. And I say that, by and large, the Scottish Parliament responds far more positively and far more readily to the wishes, the needs, the aspirations and the values of the people of Scotland. And let me just give you some few examples just to justify that statement. Because an old saying in the Bible, by their deeds shall ye ken them. Well, judge politicians not just on their commitments about what they're going to do, but judge them also on their track records. And I think that the Scottish Parliament, despite its limited powers, has a reasonable track record on many issues. Just let me give you 2 or 3 examples. Students in Scotland get a far better deal here, going to a Scottish university, than students south of the border. I remember my grandfather telling me that he and his fellow socialists, when they were in local government, way back in the 1920s, they were laying the basis of a system of student grants to enable students from poor working class families to stay on at school beyond the statutory school leaving age, and in some cases, all too few at that time, to go on to college or university. And later, the grant system was improved, and in the time of Harold Wilson's government in the 1960s, it was nationalised, so it was no longer simply at the discretion of local authorities. There was a national system, particularly here in Scotland, and students, when I went to university in the 1960s, students probably had the best financial support of any students in the world. And we thought that governments could come and governments could go, but students would also get a fair level of financial support. Well, Tory governments came, even Margaret Thatcher never completely abolished the student grants. It was the Blair government that abolished the student grants. I was appalled when I was a member of the Westminster Parliament at the time. We'd waited 18 years for a Labour government, and one of the first things they did was to abolish the student grant, even for students from low-income families, and to introduce tuition fees. A double whammy for students. And there were in that Labour cabinet people like John Reid, now Lord John Reid of Carolyn or somewhere, and Gordon Brown, of course, was in that cabinet, and guys like David Blunkett too, people who had been the beneficiaries of the generous student grant system that had been introduced by previous Labour governments and Labour local authorities. And yet here they were, they that had had the opportunity of higher education, they were now kicking away the ladder of opportunity for future generations of students. I couldn't believe it. I voted against the Labour government's proposals, and I think probably that was part of the reason why they didn't think I was a suitable candidate for the Scottish Parliament, because I wouldn't do what I was told. And there are other examples I can pick on. In Scotland, for example, senior citizens who require care in the community, the personal element of that care and the nursing element of that care are free, whereas south of the border they have to pay for that. And that is because the Scottish Parliament fully implemented the Sutherland report. So, just as the Scottish Parliament introduced a much fairer system of student finance, they have also introduced a much fairer system of help for elderly people who require that degree of care. I can think of free prescriptions too, introduced by a Labour government a way back in the 1940s. But then that commitment was broken, and the prescription fee went up and up and up. I think people south of the border are now paying about £8 per item for a prescription, whereas in Scotland the prescriptions are free. And you know, I am appalled when I see the leader of the so-called Scottish Labour Party criticising these universal benefits. What is it she says? She says, there's just something for nothing. Something for nothing. And Alex Salmond throwing out sweeties to the people of Scotland to try and get their votes. I mean, Nye Bevan and Keir Hardie must be burling in their graves as a thief. Is a free education just a sweetie? Is a free national health service just a sweetie? A free national health service and a free education were two of the great pillars which founded the Labour Party and which the Labour pioneers fought for. And yet, as I said earlier, you know, I think the track record of the Scottish Parliament in terms of standards of social justice is superior to that at Westminster on the issues that I have outlined. And that is despite the powers of the Scottish Parliament being very, very limited. And to an extent, the Scottish Parliament isn't in charge of its own agenda because of these limited powers. It's not even in charge of its own existence. I noticed that Gordon Brown gave a speech, was it last week or the week before, in this great city of Glasgow, when he came out with this idea that the Scottish Parliament should be entrenched in some way, so that it would have a kind of permanent existence. The truth of the matter is that the Scottish Parliament, as it presently constituted, it's a creature of Westminster. It was created by legislation going through Westminster, and if Westminster had the will, it could abolish the Scottish Parliament tomorrow. And so the Scottish Parliament is not an independent Parliament. And for Gordon Brown to talk about entrenchment is a lot of nonsense. The only way that the Scottish Parliament can be really entrenched is in an independent Scotland, where the Parliament of Scotland is a sovereign Parliament rather than a Parliament. And of course, in an independent Scotland, the Scottish Parliament would have the powers over areas which at present are reserved to Westminster. So I say to myself, the Scottish Parliament is doing no bad job as it is, albeit with limited powers. But if it had the full powers of an independent Parliament, it would be able to do so much more. If it had powers over foreign affairs and defence, for example, then it would be able to get rid of nuclear weapons. It would be able to decide whether or not Scotland should get involved in illegal warfare. And if the Scottish Parliament had power to regulate the financial institutions, then it would be able to stop the bankers lining their pockets with big fat bonuses and bringing the country to the brink of financial ruin. And if the Scottish Parliament had powers over tax and national insurance, then it would be able to introduce a much fairer, a progressive system of taxation, whereby the rich pay more tax, the poor pay less, and the very poor pay no tax at all, and we'd be able to get rid of the bedroom tax. So I don't see independence as an end in itself. I see independence as a means towards an end. It is a means towards building a better Scotland, a more prosperous Scotland, and a fairer Scotland. That's what it's all about. Now, before I finish, I'd just like to say something about Yes Scotland, because I chair the advisory board of Yes Scotland. We are a broad-based campaign. We have people of various political persuasions. It's not true that we're simply a front for the SNP. We have people of various political parties in Scotland, and we have people like myself of no political party at all. And what unites us, of course, is our belief in the cause of independence. Now, we're often accused of being an SNP front, and I'll let you into a conversation that I had recently with one of my former constituents, a die-hard Labour supporter she is. She voted for me for all the years I was in Parliament, I think, and she came up to me recently in the supermarket and she said, "Dennis," she says, "I've always believed in you, but surely you're not going to ask us to vote SNP. My father would kill me." I said, "Janet, your father's been dead for over 20 years, so you're safe enough on that count. And no, I'm not asking you to vote SNP. I'm not asking you to vote for any political party. This referendum next year is not a vote for a political party. It's a vote for a better Scotland for you and your family and your community." And I'm often asked too, can we win? Well, if you look at some of the opinion polls, and if you believe what the pollsters and pundits tell us, we have a hard job ahead of us, a lot of work to do. But I've always believed that this campaign is more like running a marathon rather than a short sprint. And having run more than a few marathons in my time, I know that it's not always the guy that's ahead at the halfway mark who's the first person to cross the finishing line. And I am optimistic about us crossing the finishing line. In fact, I'll tell you why. Because over the past year, since the Yes Scotland campaign was launched, I've been doing a tour of Scotland. I've been the length and breadth of Scotland, from Stornoway to Stranraer, from Doon to Dundee, and I think that we have the potential to get an army of volunteers together. And I'm not just talking about the people who are based at headquarters here in Glasgow. I'm talking about the foot soldiers that we have throughout Scotland. And once we get these people fully trained and fully mobilised, then I do think that we have the potential to build the best, the most comprehensive and the most successful grassroots community-based campaign that Scotland has ever seen. There's a lot of hearts and minds out there, and the opinion polls confirm this. There are a lot of hearts and minds out there to be won. People who are undecided, people who are looking for information, people who are looking for leadership. And I think that we have got the team and the teamwork to get out there and win these hearts and minds of the people of Scotland. We're going to take our campaign out into every city, every town, every village, every street, every home, every workplace in Scotland. And our message is quite simple. Our message is that it's only by voting yes in the referendum next year that the people of Scotland will be empowered. Empowered to build a better Scotland, a more prosperous Scotland, and through our full membership of the international community, we can help to build a better world. That's what it's all about. And let's go for it.